Hello, welcome back to my channel and to my Pier Paolo Pasolini retrospective. And today we've reached Hawks and Sparrows, or as it is in Italian, Uccellacce e Uccellini. I love that. Now, this is a strange film, right? You've made 4 films, 2 masterpieces in Acatone and Mamma Roma. You made this documentary, Love Meetings. And then you broaden out your cinematic horizons with this beautiful Life of Christ movie, The Gospel According to St. Matthew. So what do you do next? Well, what you do next is you team up with one of Italy's most famous comic actors and you make a sort of scatty, fast-forward, daft parable about Marxism. Okay? For those people who don't know, Totò, who is the main actor in the film, he was a very, very famous and beloved figure in Italy. I don't really know how to describe him to people who don't know him. He's a bit like if you mixed up sort of Noel Coward, Buster Keaton and Jack Tatty, you're getting close to Totò. Right? Very famous, very popular figure in Italy. And here he is teaming up with this kind of Marxist firebrand, radical art house director. It's the kind of thing that just couldn't happen nowadays. And it's one of the reasons why I like this movie, despite its rather unpromising setup. He plays this guy, he's just walking along a road with his son, played by Ninetto Davoli, one of Pasolini's favourite actors, who he found in a sort of slum on the outskirts of Rome. And they're walking along, and they represent every man, right? And as they're walking along, they're joined by this talking crow. It's that kind of movie, guys. And the crow is most obviously a leftist intellectual like Pasolini himself. He's a kind of surrogate for Pasolini. And he's always trying to tell them what they should be doing in life and the road they should be taking. And the first part of the film is a story told by the crow about 2 monks who are with St. Francis of Assisi. And Francis of Assisi says, look, go out and preach to the birds. Go and preach to the hawks and the sparrows. And so this leads to a comic scene where Totò and Ninetto Davoli play these 2 monks, and they go out and they start talking to the birds, and much comic hilarity ensues. And eventually they manage it, and they speak the birds' language, including hopping around on the spot. They go back to Francis of Assisi and say, we've done it. But then the hawk killed the sparrow. And Francis of Assisi says, well, you've done it wrong. What you need to do is you make sure not only that you preach the word of the Lord, but that you stop them hating each other. So, of course, as he did with Jesus in the last film, Pasolini converts St. Francis of Assisi into a Marxist rebel. Then in the second part of the movie, it's revealed that Totò's character is a sort of petty landlord. And he's going around trying to get money out of these poor peasants who live in these crumbling down houses that he owns. And he in turn has to pay that money to an overlord, a member of the bourgeoisie, who he's an employee of. And so we see the system that is in operation in modern day Italy. And the crow keeps lecturing them about how they can change that if they follow a Marxist course. In the end, this is where you see Pasolini's own self-doubt creeping in. The leftist intellectual becomes a bit of a bore, and Totò and his son decide to kill the bird and eat it, and then go off on their own merry way. Pasolini does preempt that by saying those people who eat their professors end up becoming a bit professorial themselves. So he holds out a bit of hope for the Marxist cause. But he also points up that the working class and the lower middle class find leftist intellectuals a bit of a bore, and they're not really speaking the same language. So there you have it, my friends. That's the movie. A 1960s sort of Marxist parable, told like a sort of religious parable, a bit like a sort of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, but for leftists in the modern era. It's a bit of a hard sell, isn't it? I can all see you now turning off and thinking, I'm not going to watch that, Mike. I'm just going to go and watch Columbo instead. I can't blame you. I think it was a hard sell at the time. The thing is, I kind of like this movie. I have all sorts of issues with it. Like right at the end, as they're about to continue on their journey, they come across a young woman at the side of the road, and they both abandon each other to go off with the woman. And, this sort of Marxist dislike of sex this distracts people from the true course of, socialism. And it's a sort of slight whiff of misogyny. There's a slight whiff of condescension towards the working classes throughout the film, I think. In the Criterion box set, there's a very interesting extra where there's some old footage of Ninetto Davoli and Pasolini talking in an interview. And Pasolini lightly patronises and condescends to Devoli. It mentions the term the third world. He says, do you know what that means? And he says proletariat. He says, do you know what that means? Almost making fun of him. It makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And there's a bit of that discomfort in the whole movie, actually. But overall, putting those little niggles aside, I really like this movie just because of the fact it exists at all. Could anyone make this movie now? Imagine a popular comic actor, say Lee Mack, for example, makes a film with a radical, politicised filmmaker, a kind of zany comedy. A lot of the time when I was watching this, I was reminded of the early 60s British films of Richard Lester, the Beatles films, all that sort of zany running around and speeded up film. Like the Goon movie that he made, the running, jumping and standing still film with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan. It's interesting how that kind of very English comedy kind of moved away from Tony Richardson and Richard Lester and went over to Europe, and it's picked up by Pasolini of all people. And you kind of see it throughout this movie. The other thing that's worth mentioning with regard to the sort of scattiness of the film is its wonderful opening credits. We saw how in the Gospel according to St. Matthew that Pasolini started to use the opening credits thematically. So, you remember the Missy Luber Congolian Mass bleeds into the classical music of Bach. Well, here, the credits are sung in a sort of comic song that rhymes Pasolini and Alfredo Bini and all this sort of stuff. It's great fun, actually. Incidentally, the music throughout the film is by Ennio Morricone, and there's this really catchy kind of modern pop tune by Ennio Morricone, which is really, really good. And it's just extraordinary that a film like this exists. Could it ever be made now? Would anyone watch it now? I just think it's fantastic there was an age where all these different strands of culture that seem to be running parallel to each other kind of met and fused and did something different. Totò is amazing in the film. He's very funny, but he never sort of works against the film. He's working with Pasolini. And it's an amazing collaboration to watch. So after all these years, it's a bit of a museum piece. It's not a movie to watch and be entertained by, but it still has that beauty of Pasolini, that slightly disturbing quality, and also that sense of innocence, particularly in the performance of Nenetto Devoli. I like it very much. I can't really explain why, and I can understand why it might not be, a film that you're going to put down as the next to watch. I must watch this on your list. But if you've got a moment, give it a try. It might change the way you see things.